I'm sorry, Meek. It's very hard to give a rousing speech with the noise.
Welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about Thor Love and Thunder. Recently, I polled our viewers on my Twitter and our community page asking if they liked the movie. Now, while a majority of people said yes, a lot of people commented that the movie was too silly or that it undermined its dramatic moments with jokes. Alright, and that's a fair criticism, but I'm going to explain my thoughts on the movie and why this silliness is Taika Waititi's greatest strength and not his greatest weakness. And a little later, I'll be joined by two of the best, ScreenCrush's own Matt Singer and Rachel Leashman from the Mary Sue to give me their take on Thor Love and Thunder. And by the way, we've got a really big announcement coming this Friday. Can't wait to share it with you guys. It's going to be super cool. Now, you can't help but compare this movie to Thor Ragnarok because, you know, same director, writer, cast, style, characters, etc. Now, my feelings for Ragnarok are well documented on this channel. It's my favorite MCU film because it's not just hilarious.
Piss off, Ghost! He's freaking gone.
But it's also a story about nationalism, colonialism, and immigration.
You know, for kids.
It's also metal as hell. But Thor Ragnarok also had a huge advantage. It was the movie that followed Thor the Dark World. The stylistic break from one of the weakest MCU movies made Ragnarok even better. But Love and Thunder has to follow Ragnarok, which might make it seem less than by comparison. But I think the Love and Thunder is still leagues ahead of most other MCU movies. There is so much to love here. It manages to weave in the entire history of the Thor movies, showing that he and Jane broke up because he was scared of being heartbroken. And we see why. In Endgame, Thor doesn't handle heartbreak very well. After all, the guy's been alive for 1,500 years. Deaths of loved ones are a fairly new thing to him. And there were also subtle nods to the rest of the Thor franchise, like when Thor enchants Mjolnir like his father did, and the movie ends with Thor also becoming his father, granting power to children and adopting the child of his enemy. The movie is also hilarious, but most of the jokes serve a double purpose. Stormbreaker being jealous was a funny gag, but it also shows that the hammers are conduits for Thor's emotions, not just for his powers. We also saw some new creative choices for the MCU, like the black and white shadow realm, which is an outward expression of Gore's internal suffering. But most importantly, the movie's fun. Everyone in the movie is happy to go off on a space biking adventure, especially Jane. And Jane is the ultimate audience member. She's been on the sidelines for years, watching the heroes get to have fun, and now she gets to play along too, just like any of us would. Plus, she has an incurable disease, which creates a delicate balancing act for the movie. Luckily, Taika Waititi is the perfect director to tell that story. Taika Waititi is in his imperial phase. This is a term usually used in music that describes the peak of an artist's commercial and creative success. Now, there are certain themes present in all of his movies that you can see expressed perfectly in Love and Thunder. Waititi once said, "I want to explore the painful comedy of growing up and interpreting the world. I believe that despite our faults and inadequacies, through all the pain and heartbreak, there is still room to laugh." I think that's what makes my films different, the feeling that although there is often darkness, there are also little bits of light to encourage hope and hold on to possibility. So let's look closer at that quote. The Thor movies are essentially about Thor growing up. He is an angry teenager in Thor. In the Dark World, he's a young man who's fallen in love for the first time. Ragnarok is like he just hit his 20s and he learned that his parents were flawed and he has to learn to believe in himself. And this movie is about Thor taking responsibility and raising a family.
So I think failure is a brilliant thing. It teaches you a lot of stuff, and you end up coming up with better ideas often when you fail at things.
So Thor, this all-powerful cosmic space Viking, is still like a kid, learning how to interpret the world.
You know, I love the naive. I love people who can see things with an innocent viewpoint, I think, you know, so.
Waititi's breakout hit Boy, it's an amazing film by the way, is about a poor kid who idolizes his dad, even though his dad is the layabout jerk. But there are all these silly fantasy sequences where we see his imaginary dad and how great he is.
And he can do heaps of cool stuff. He can dance as good as Michael Jackson.
When in real life, his dad is a loser and a terrible father.
I did that. Don't get into the Nazi stuff.
And this is basically Thor's arc in Ragnarok.
But what's that got to do with Love and Thunder?
Well, what impressed me most about Love and Thunder is how Waititi interpreted Thor as this naive guy who is afraid to open up because he might get hurt. And this fits in perfectly with where Thor is in the MCU right now.
Oh, you know, Jane and I aren't even dating anymore, so
As these things happen, though, you know, nothing lasts forever. The only thing that...
Why don't you come sit
I'm
down?
not done yet.
Waititi took this heartache and made a metal character study about a man learning to love. And what ultimately made him able to love was the heartbreak of losing Jane for good. This is where the movie gets personal for Taika Waititi. The channel We Need to Talk About Film made a great video essay about Waititi called Happy Sad Cinema that shared this quote.
When the atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable, that is when we feel the need to laugh most.
It's a great video, you should watch it. So this is the balancing act of Waititi's work, to show us a goofy Hitler in a child's imagination and then the horrors of Nazi-occupied reality. Or, in the case of Love and Thunder, this harsh reality is Jane's cancer. This is where the story gets personal for me, and maybe for you, and definitely for Waititi.
Mum survived breast cancer, was cancer, and I started getting really paranoid that I was going to get it, and I started thinking, okay, if I keep thinking about that, that's going to make it happen. And
Waititi added the scenes of Jane's mom having cancer. That's not in the comics, because this resonates for him personally. Jane's cancer was never treated as a joke. Her disease is why she needs to be Thor. She needs to balance out that darkness with silliness and adventure, just as we, living in a world filled with suffering, can use a little space Viking silliness to remind us that the world can still be fun. But that's just my thoughts. Today I'm joined by two of the best. We got ScreenCrush's own Matt Singer and Rachel Leashman from the Mary Sue. So Matt, read your review, but I want to hear your hot take on Thor Love and Thunder. What did you think of the movie?
Here's my, it's not a very hot take. It's more like a lukewarm take. It's like, it's okay. It's not bad. It's fine. I think one of the big problems that I had was just, you know, you can only surprise someone with the same trick one time, right? Like, you know, Thor, while the first Thor movie had comedic elements in it, they were all jokes about how, like, serious and stuffy Thor was, because he was this ancient god, and he was very serious, and he didn't know what coffee was, or any of these things, you know, and that was funny in that movie.
Another!
But he was sort of a stiff, that was the joke, and that was kind of the role he played until Thor Ragnarok, where he just kind of became like an improv comedian, essentially. You know, he's just riffing on things.
Son of a bitch, you're still alive.
Which was a delight, and it was a wonderful kind of surprise. And, you know, I think that movie holds up really well. I just rewatched it, and I enjoyed it all over again.
He transformed himself into a snake, and he knows that I love snakes. So I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, yeah, it's me! And he stabbed me.
And I think this movie, the new movie, Love and Thunder, is funny too, but it does feel a little bit like a magician, like, doing the same magic trick twice in a row after you already know how he does the trick, or you've at least seen him do it once. And so you enjoy the trick, but you're less amazed and astonished and dazzled because you know he can do it because he's done it before. So that was sort of, I guess, my kind of main thing was it just, you know, it feels a lot like the last movie, and kind of like a carbon copy of it. You know, I didn't feel like there was a lot of things in it that really truly surprised me and delighted me the way the last movie did. That's not to say it's bad. I enjoyed it. I sat there. I wasn't bored. I wasn't upset. I wasn't angry. I had a nice time. But, you know, if you're asking me, like, how does it rank with other Thor movies or other Marvel movies, you know, to me it'd be like kind of in the middle. It's like a decent one, but I think it has some issues, and it definitely didn't break any new ground for the Thor franchise. It did kind of feel like they said to Taika Waititi, you did a great job, just do it again. And he went, okay, and he pretty much tried to do basically the same thing over again, to me with some diminishing returns. And we could probably talk about some of the reasons maybe why. Maybe the subject matter in this one is a little more like serious and dark, and perhaps that doesn't mesh quite as well with like Thor making jokes the whole time. I don't know. That's something we could perhaps debate. But I mean, overall, I would say I enjoyed it, but not as much as Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah, I mean, Ragnarok had the benefit of coming after Thor the Dark World, which of course like tops everybody's MCU ranking list, but it also, you know, it was a Ragnarok for Asgard in the movie, but it was a Ragnarok for the franchise, and saying, okay, let's stop being so stuffy. And because if you look at those Phase 1 and 2 MCU movies, Ragnarok and Thor are filmed completely different, at least all the stuff in space. Like, it's shot very dark, and it takes, like you said, takes itself very seriously. And I have gone on the record talking about how much I love Ragnarok. But, you know, I agree with you to a certain point that, like, it was a little bit like a magician re-showing the same trick. But on the other hand, we also saw some new things that are, you know, pretty dark and pretty real, like Jane dying of cancer. Rachel, what about you? What's your take on the movie? Where did you land on it?
I liked it more than I like Ragnarok. I don't dislike Ragnarok, but my favorite Taika Waititi movies are the ones that are kind of like you're laughing and then all of a sudden you're just sobbing and you don't know how you got there. And that is very much what happened with me in this movie. Like the credits started rolling and my boss looked over at me and I was just crying. And then I saw it the second time and was like, oh, this is fine. I know what happens. I won't cry. And then I did the exact same thing where I just like sat there and sobbed, much like I love Jojo Rabbit, and it's much like that. Like when you see the shoes and then you see them later in the movie and you're just like crying over shoes. That's how I felt watching this. And so like, yeah, I guess it is a magician doing the same trick again, but I am the I guess the one that they'll trick every single time, and I'll be like, where'd the quarter come from? Because I was just like, great. I think it also like hit me specifically just because like I just went through my dad dying of cancer, and so watching this movie where I'm like, my dad would have loved it because he loved Ragnarok, and pairing that with like specifically the scene where Thor is like begging Jane, like, hey, do not pick up Mjolnir, like fight. I was like, yeah, that selfishness, I understand. Like, I just went through this. And so it was just a lot of things that hit me specifically where I was like, no notes. I don't care that some of this doesn't make sense or like, does it really fit into the larger MCU? I'll figure that out sometime down the line when they reference this movie and something. But like, I just enjoyed it, and I would see it like 3 more times just because I think the bait and switch of Sweet Child of Mine from the trailer into like what it actually means for this movie
and the title
was just like, yeah, like so many things that you're like, oh, this is gonna be about this, and it wasn't, was just worth it for me.
And I know, Matt, I've read a lot of your MCU, breakdowns and rankings and things, and you've always, really spoke highly of Thor and the score and things like that of the first movie. So do you think this movie, after getting that initial shock of Funny Thor, was this movie too much Funny Thor? And how do you think this movie kind of rode that line between comedy and tragedy, like Rachel was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hemsworth is great at doing this version of the character. I thought he was fine being the straight man Thor in the first couple movies and in like the Avengers, but he is really funny, and he was good in Ghostbusters. I agree. I mean, like this is the sort of thing he can do. He is sort of good at that kind of himbo, incredibly handsome, slightly airheaded, but good at heart character. Like that's something he does play really well. I think, listening to what Rachel is saying and why she enjoyed it, and sort of the issues that I had, I feel like a lot of it is not so much that Thor is funny, it's that it's like what he's reacting to and the world that he's in, I guess I would say. So, like in Ragnarok, he's put on Sakaar, which is this insane place with, it's ruled by Jeff Goldblum, and everyone is dressed, psychotically, and there's bright colors, and everyone's a goofball, and Stan Lee is the barber, and it's just a bizarre place, and like the only sane reaction to a crazy place like that is to kind of play it the way Chris Hemsworth did, and it just sort of, to me, it fit perfectly there. And in this movie, like, he's fighting Christian Bale, who, first of all, the character is so, dark and wants to kill everyone and everything. But and then the way he plays it, it's like, just compare Jeff Goldblum as an antagonist versus Christian Bale. It's like Jeff Goldblum is hysterical in Ragnarok, doing what, his typical, the Jeff Goldblum thing. And Christian Bale is like giving this huge, epic, emotional, intense performance. And so when you like counterbalance that with, this version of Thor, who even in one scene, like, he finds Sif missing an arm and he's making jokes about her not having her arm. Like, I mean, dude, that's your friend. That's Sif. I feel like he should be a little perturbed about her losing an arm. It's not like she's got a black eye. She lost an arm, and he's literally like making jokes about her arm being in Valhalla. It's just that to me was the sort of stuff where I was like, I don't think he quite nailed the tone here. And then when he winds up being sort of put in conflict with this very serious villain, to say nothing about, Jane and her subplots. It just didn't seem to quite all mesh together as nicely as it did for me with Ragnarok. That's sort of where I was going. I like this scene where Thor is funny, and I like this scene where Christian Bale is giving one of the more intense and ominous and spooky evil bad guy performances in Marvel. But when they were together, it just, it was like it was a sandwich made of two delicious things that don't necessarily go together. It's like a peanut butter and salmon sandwich. Like, I'll eat either one of those things, but if you put them together in a sandwich, some of the bites are going to be kind of weird and hard to get through. And so that was sort of where I was at. I don't think that it was a matter of there was too much funny or not. It was more just like, it was more just that they seemed to be almost in different movies that were kind of smushed together at times.
I mean, we talk about this movie having swings between lightheartedness and tragedy. I mean, it starts with child death, and there's really not many things that are more depressing than that. Obviously, like, it was, undone at the end, but like, that's really, and especially since there's children kidnapped all the way through it, it kind of sends you a message, hey, no one's safe.
All gods will die.
And there was actually, I read an interview with Christian Bale, I forget which outlet it was through, where he talked about the things they weren't able to use. Like, Gore starts off with all of these tattoos that are religious in nature, and when he cuts them off of himself, and they filmed all this, and it was apparently like just way too much. And in his words, they had to keep it, more at the PG level. So I did appreciate, like, I think he is the most relatable villain we've had since Eric Killmonger, and that you completely get where he's coming from. He has been screwed over by the system, and he does think he's just making change, but typical Marvel, he's also been possessed by an evil thing that's making him do this. It is pretty incredible that we could see a movie like this with these kind of swings where Gore is this evil, and unlike Hela, he's not having a good time being evil. He's not cackling, he's not smiling, like, he is just flat out about the mission. And at a certain extent, like, when you see how much of an ass Zeus is, it's kind of hard to argue with where he's coming from.
All gods will die.
What about you, Rachel? Where did, like, Gore land as a villain for you?
Well, so I know my own bias. I am a huge Patrick Bateman fan. American Psycho is one of my favorite things in this world. So seeing Christian Bale be another villain, quote unquote, was delightful. Like, I love when he kind of inhabits that, like, it's not gray because they're both murderers, but like the towing the line of like, what's going on here? Like, should I feel bad for this person, or is this person so evil I shouldn't care kind of line? And he does it really well. So like, I kind of agree with Matt where it's like sometimes Gore was so kind of to an extreme, and then Thor's like kind of messing with him, that every once in a while I was like, oh, you guys are on completely different wavelengths. Like, Thor thinks he's invincible to this guy, and Gore's like, you're not, dude. And so I liked Gore's whole arc, and I do think one of the last moments with Gore is going to be a meme where he's just like, I'm dying, and there's like no real, like, he doesn't take a breath, he's just like, I'm dying, it's fine. So I love his arc exclusively because I will watch Christian Bale be a villain in anything, but I think part of me does miss that Gore wasn't just completely butt out like he is in the comics, and didn't have like the black fedora looking hat and stuff like that, but I enjoyed him. I think I do wish we could have had more than just this one outing for Gore, but I also know that that's probably how they got it to be Christian Bale, was they were like, you're in this one movie and then you're done.
Another thing about the movie, everybody's always going, well, where did, what's the next thing in the MCU? Thor's got a daughter now. Is she a young Avenger? Hercules is in it. So, Matt, what from this movie are you looking forward to seeing more of in this franchise down the line?
I mean, while I didn't particularly love the way that they got there with his, I don't know, daughter or niece, she calls him Uncle Thor, not Daddy Thor or whatever. So I don't know quite what to call her, but so I guess it's at least having him have a daughter or a surrogate daughter or whatever it might be. At least that does give you something kind of different for the character. If I'm gonna say this one felt a lot like the last one, they certainly left Thor this time in sort of a place where you would assume the next movie would be quite different, because that's exploring a side of the character that we haven't seen before. So that I would certainly be, I am sort of curious about what they're going to do with that character. How they got there, that whole ending, that to me was not one of my favorite parts of the movie, including the I'm dying part was a little silly. The not the good kind of, Taika Waititi comedy. It was sort of the bizarre. And, like, why didn't he just make a better... Like, there's so many other wishes he could have made, right?
That had crossed my mind. A lot of people are asking us, why didn't he...
Like, why don't you wish to be with your daughter forever or something?
Like, eternity...
Like, if that's what you want...
Eternity must be a very specific genie. You know, the some genies, like, in these stories,
Right.
are like, they take everything you say super literally, That must be it. It must be like, no, it's one thing. Like, you can't wish for your grandparents back. You got to pick one of them.
I feel like if he said, I want to be with my daughter for the rest of time, they'd be like, okay, bye, and he would just die. Like, it wouldn't be like they both got to live.
We have several afterlives for you to choose from, Gore, whichever Marvel afterlife you want to go to.
All of you are wrong!
We've gotten way off your actual question, which was like, what do I want to see next? And, like, yeah, I guess I am sort of curious what they do with, Thor plus a small child. I guess that could be an interesting angle. I imagine a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's just like The Mandalorian or something like that. But I think that character, I did, again, having said that, I was feeling like the character kind of felt like he was spinning his wheels a little bit in this one. At least giving him some, a sort of a fresh angle, a different sort of drive of having a kid to protect. I think that at least could be very interesting. Hercules, I mean I love Brett Goldstein, but Hercules has never been one of my favorite Marvel characters, so I can't say that like when he showed up I was like kicking the seats and cheering and fist pumping. That I could take or leave, but that's fine.
That is, the Brett Goldstein casting did make me care about Hercules for the first time. Like, I'm very excited to see what happens there. Rachel, how about you? What are you looking forward to in the MCU next, coming from this?
Well, talking about Hercules real quick, I literally did kick a seat when it was Brett Goldstein, and my boss was like, why do you know that? And I was like, he's here, and I started doing the chant from Ted Lasso and like screaming in the theater. And this was like the first press screening for interviews and stuff, and everyone in there was like, why is she flipping out? And I was like, because it's Brett Goldstein. I was like, I don't care about that character. I care about Brett Goldstein. And then, so that was... I don't care about Hercules as a character, but I do care about Brett Goldstein. So I was like, I'll go through Russell Crowe's weird Italian accent for Italian, Greek, whatever he was doing, for a whole movie if it means I get to see the two of them figure out their dynamic. For me, though, I am excited about Thor and Love. I think I like their dynamic, which I know it's because that's Chris Hemsworth's daughter. I liked that whole little dynamic and how they're helping people, and I would watch a movie of them just going planet to planet, just the two of them helping all these different... It's basically Star Trek, I'm realizing as I'm saying this, that they're just going planet to planet and helping these creatures and aliens who need assistance, and then he's just going to make Starfleet in the MCU.
Well, actually, the Prime Directive would forbid Thor and Love from interfering with us.
Get a life, will you, people? Crying out loud, it's just a TV show.
But yeah, like, I would watch whatever with them. I don't think she's going to be a young Avenger. I do think, like, with the Thor Will Return, they are showing us that, like, some of our original Avengers are still around, and they're still technically the Avengers, even though we have, like, the Thunderbolts coming, and Kate Bishop, and America, and Kamala, and all of them. But I do hope that this means, like, either Thor just keeps getting his own little standalone movies, and we're just going on those adventures, or, like, he kind of becomes a Captain Marvel figure where he shows up when they obviously need a god versus, like, the Avengers that exist on Earth.
You guys are so screwed now!
All right, well, thank both of you for joining me. Rachel, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Rachel Leashman, on Instagram at Rachel_Leashman, and all of my writing is at The Mary Sue. And if you're a Pedro Pascal fan, you can listen to me on Pedro Pascal.
And Matt Singer?
ScreenCrush. Check out ScreenCrush.com, and my Twitter account is at Matt Singer.
And thanks. We want to hear from all of you guys. Down in the comments below, you can at any of us on our social media platforms. What did you think of Thor Love and Thunder? And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash the bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.